Tamworth, autumn. 925 miles seemed a short distance from the ridge which they had climbed. In the plain below, where two rivers moved, the town, Ethelflaed's capital, looked bright in the summer's morning. They rode on, stopping at a settlement just off Watling Street, and Osric used Aldrid's silver for bread and ale at a small inn, the first down from the ridge. The Norse seemed nervous of taking it, but when she encouraged them, ate as if they had never seen food in their lives. They also walked strangely, and as Osric looked she realized they must have been imprisoned longer than she thought. How long? Osric asked Eilif, the elder of the two grandfathers. Since spring, Kriegvikvind, he told her. No one in Mercia would buy us. Why? Osric asked. Because the food is poor, they need it for themselves. And that's what the West Saxons told you? Osric asked. The man nodded, and she left him to eat. Perhaps that was why they clung to her company. No money, and the idea that food was scarce. There is plenty of food in Mercia, plenty of ready cash for slaves, Osric pointed out to Elfkin. Why do you suppose they told this Norse family this? Elfkin looked back over to them. Under Ethelflaed's banner of St. Werburgh, Ostith's thoughts went on, at a main crossroads in the center of the country. And us, Elfkin pointed out. What do we have in common? And then Osric said to Elfkin, do you truly trust me, Elfkin? Do the men? How can you ask that, Lady Osric? He replied, but saw the seriousness in her face. Even these Norse trust you, for they call you Kriegvikvind. Is it some kind of magic to them? We have to get inside Tamworth Castle, inside the fortress, Osric told him, wondering to the repute she had received for that name. There are Norse heading in that direction. And she told Elfkin the plan, and to be honest, he took it better than she expected. They were to be slaves once more, but this time, Ekkel spoke. He was the older of the two men, and his family had been slavers when they lived in Irion, supplying boats that took slaves. Osric thought about Finoli, and Ethan, who had been taken by slavers such as Egil and sold to men who owned ships. What had all seemed a long time ago was now bright and acute in her face. But she carried on, and agreed that the Norse would take them to Tamworth, as had been Aldrid's plan. For what purpose? Osric did not know. When Ekkel had explained the plan to Eilif, that they were to be disguised as Norse, he laughed, and accepted. Not much to work with, he said to Osric, and they laughed, as did the men. They could do with a bath, and so into the Tame they went, fully clothed, and when they came out he and the other grandfather tried to make her warriors as Norse-like as possible, putting clay through their hair and tying it back, tying a band around their waists. When they had finished he shook his head. Just poor men who have been captive so long, they have forgotten who they are. Ekkel, the other grandfather said. You are all very good at being Norse, Osric lied, when Elfkin asked for the translation. Koltigar, who knew some Norse, gave Osric a doubtful look. We play the game, and when we are inside the fortress, you will be amongst friends, she told them. And then the fun really begins, for she had to stop whatever was happening inside Tamworth's walls, stop the unity between Wessex and Mercia and Sigtrygg's Northumbria. But as they fastened ropes about one another's ankles, at a pretense of enslavement, and Osric saw more Norse heading to Offa's city. 88,888,888. They were a mile away, when the Norse who were pretending to be their captors chanced upon more Norse. Where are you going? Ekkel asked the man, in whose company a woman and a child rode. To the city, he told Ekkel, nodding to Tamworth. To our cousin, Sigtrygg. Ah, thought Osric, he was going to the city. But why? What had Ethelstan called them all there for? And the child? Ekkel asked. The boy shied away from him, but Osric caught a glimpse of disfigurement to his face, a bone, perhaps, out of place, or damage when he was born. He had the look of Neil Glundube for a moment, and Osric's heart softened when she thought of the boy, grown to a man, called to a truce, a meeting such as in Tamworth, and then slaughtered. He is going to Mercia, for a special event, the man said. He has been asked for, especially. He leaned over to the boy, who shied away at the man's gaze. The woman slapped the boy's face and he slowly looked at the man. Whatever the special event was, Clearly the boy did not like the sound of it. And when the boy said something too quick for Osrith to catch, the man dragged him from the horse and began to beat him. Then, he took a rope and bound him to a tree, making to ride away. "What are you doing with that child?" Osrith cried, as the man and the woman took their horses around. By the tree, the child was whimpering. "Nasty piece of cursed shit," the man said to the boy. "You're just going to leave him?" Osrith demanded to know. "The gods have punished him." This time, the words came from the woman's mouth. Osrith, slipping the ropes from her own ankles and wrists, reached for the blade that was once Aldrid's and held it out to the man. "And the one true God sent us to save his life," Osrith told him. "You cannot, it is fate." The woman screamed. Osrith glanced over to the woman. "If it is fate, it is also fate that I am here." She looked at the boy. "What is your name?" she asked in Norse. "Bjol," said the boy. And beside her, there was a scrape of steel in reply to her own. The man had pulled out his own sword. Was she really going to manage to do this? Her head was not right, and she had a sword that was not hers. But she continued to look at the boy and asked, "Bjol, has this man treated you cruelly?" The boy looked at the man and then nodded swiftly. The woman slid from her horse and stepped towards the boy, but Osrith gave her a look. She also noticed symbols, sigils, that told Osrith she was a seer, a sorceress of some sort. "So you are mother and father to a boy whose face is disfigured and you were going to abandon him?" Osrith told them both. Norse, Danes, Saxons, Britons, Gales too, all dealt with young like that, or at least before they were Christian. And of those who were Christian, charity, not the cruel abandonment of imperfect people, was the way. It was her culture's way, too. Whatever this special event was, it would not have a happy outcome for Bjol. "You should have done it when he was newborn," Osrith told the mother. The woman muttered something that Osrith could not hear. "Oh, you mean you couldn't?" Osrith suggested, and she turned to the man. "And you let her?" "Now this boy, who has been brought up with love by you, is going to be left behind to starve. Where are your gods now that tell you this is all right?" And Osrith gave the man no time to be prepared, as she lifted the West Saxon warrior's sword. One stroke, two, and he was on the ground. A third, and he had dropped his sword. Osrith too, however, felt she could not hold the steel. Her head swam before her eyes, and she looked to Eglfrith, raising her left hand to her head, staggering a little. Her captain did the rest, skewering the man, dead. The woman howled, and howled even more when Bjol was untied, unharmed. Osrith, though, was not all right, and Eglfrith took her arm. "He's dead now, Captain," he told Osrith. "What of the boy?" "He can come with us," she said. "The mother too, as she obviously loves him." She turned to the Norse who had been slaves with them. "Will you accept this child?" And the mother. At this there was low talking between the two grandfathers and the young women. All of them were casting furtive glances to the woman and her child. "Yes, Ilaf told her, until Tamworth, and if we are truly free, then you will make us no longer." "Good," Osrith replied, taking a skin of water that Elfkin had offered to her, and drinking from it. "Good." And they rode to Tamworth, leaving Ska Tilda Pilcro Elschele Grimson lying in the road. 88,888,888. The keep door creaked open when Ilaf and Ekel pounded on it. Two guards arrived, nodding languidly over the faces of the two Norsemen, and then glanced at their prisoners. "We come from Aldrid." Osrith had got Ekel to practice saying this, for any guard opening the gate would be suspicious if the Slava spoke in Norse. And, as she looked, she saw that the guards were Miral's men. So that was it, the slaves were for the independence that Miral was striving for. They were needed to carry out the dirty work, so to speak, and the lords supporting independence were not above paying men like Aldred to help find them. It was where they would have got Ethelflaed's banners and knew where to set up. These Norse that were coming, sending Sigtryggr here to talk strategy at a large witan, while the other Norse will invade. Distasteful, Osrith thought, as she thought to Admiral, her friend. How could he be mixed up in all of this? Was independence such a goal to him, and poor, dead Elfrith, that they would go to any length to acquire it? For it was Miral's man, Hermund, who was standing just inside the gate, noting the slaves being ushered in. Osrith hid her head and looked at the floor. And beside her, Osrith felt a little body, and she looked down to her leg. The boy, who was to have been abandoned, or faced some other sort of danger at Tamworth, was walking beside her. Osrith glanced back, and saw the angry look on the mother's face. Clearly she was furious that the boy had given her the slip. "This way," the guard said, pointing to a wide passage lit by torches that led under the fortress at Tamworth, and to Eccles, making to shut the gate, said, "You can go now." "Go?" asked Eilif, standing in the threshold, so that the guard could not close it. "Go." Their warrior told him. But Eilif knew the game and played it well. He put out a hand waiting for payment. "Here," said the guard, playing a bag of silver into the man's hand. Eilif waited, and his persistence paid off, the guard looking reluctant to hand over the second bag. The Norse turned. The last Osrith saw of them was the outraged look on the woman's face that the boy had thwarted her. "What's this?" the guard asked, picking Joel away from Osrith's leg. "A bonus," Eilif told the guard. "His mother says he is a good boy." And Osrith nodded to Eilif, who could well have insisted the boy be returned, and he nodded back. The door closed. As they walked, Osrith picked out brief snorts of suppressed laughter from her men. They knew the Mercen guards of course, but continued to play their part. "Put them over here with the others," the first guard told them. On one side of the open soldiers' barracks was a prison cell. 8 prisoners, Norse by the look of them, and people who looked very poor, rags only just covering them. The smell was bad, sat in groups, vacant expressions on their faces. "No," the second guard said. "The commander will want to speak to them first." And Osrith found herself face to face with Miral, her dear friend, and she suppressed the urge to grin. "So, who speaks for you?" Miral demanded, when none of them moved or gave any protest. "I do," Osrith told him. "We are outlaws, and were captured and became slaves. We chose to be," she added, garnishing the story. "We are fled from our lord." "What did you do?" Miral asked. "What did we not do?" Osrith replied, glancing over to her men. "Well, there was the drinking, and the whoring, all our lord's daughters." Miral's face froze, and amusement surged in Osrith's stomach. "Yes, we are him out of house and home, poured all his farm animals too, except the sheep. We aren't Cymric," she added. And then she looked at Elfkin, because if she hadn't she would have burst out laughing. "Oh, and his wife, wouldn't you say?" Elfkin's mouth flicked at the corners. "She had very big." Her deputy trailed off, and put his hands to his chest as if cupping breasts. "Tracts of land." You could really get lost on her furrow. It was enough to raise Miral's suspicions, but he looked back to Osrith and asked her if there was anything else she had to say in their defense. "Only that, these men loyal Mercens, led astray by an impulsive captain," Osrith concluded, then added, "who thought your bed a little lumpy." It was a wonder her warriors were not in fits of hysterics by now, but perhaps the tension with the Norse on the road, the child being abandoned with the twisted face, and the anger of the mother had got to them. And it was Miral who laughed then, when he realized it was Osrith standing before him, rope-bound not manacled, and that Falkbald, Egelfrith, Oshir and Elfkin were the two, and Osrith's warrior from her lands. "Osrith," he repeated, and drew her to him. Tell me everything." 88,888,888. While the warriors participated in good food and laughed with their fellow Mercen guards, Osrith told him about the Slavers, about the Norse they had, and them, Osrith's outlaws. "We need them to offer to Sigtryg," Miral told her, a little shiftily, and Osrith felt her stomach sink that her friend had indeed been involved in such a way. "But there is an agreement happening between Mercia and Northumbria, with Aethelstan," Osrith prompted. "And Aldhelm believes he may be open to another agreement, one more suited to his needs." And he told her of the plan, the audacious plan which, Osrith admitted, could work well. For Ethelfled herself had gifted some Norse the Wirelem, the land beyond Seaster and Brunnenburg. The plan was, to allow Mercia her independence, under Aethelstan, but separate to Wessex, in exchange for more land. When Miral told her which land, Osrith laughed. Sister Brunenburg, she exclaimed. But they would have access to the Meuse, and all of Northumbria's waterways. Miral nodded. And two of Ethelflaed's burghs, she told him. But this wedding has to be stopped. Miral told her, we need enough of an incentive for the man not to marry the Wessex candidate. Wedding? And he told her that there was to be a wedding, to Bon Wessex and Mercia to Northumbria. Who? Osrith demanded. Miral said nothing. Who? She asked again. I can think of no other princess in Wessex. Then think harder, Miral told her, a little testily. Who might be of Wessex, with strong Mercian interest? Old friend. Who indeed? Osrith thought, and she replied. If Aethelstan himself were a woman, I would say him. He would be ideal. She looked at Miral's face. Aethelstan was at Win. He had a sister. She is called? Miral told her. Edward is for the match. Aethelstan is clearly for the match. Eadgyth, Osrith thought. How are you going to stop it? We hadn't got a plan, Miral told her. But then you came. And I think I know what you can do. But the Norse are coming, Osrith told him, insistently. Norse are coming, Miral told her, because the wedding is between one West Saxon princess and one Norse king. But more Norse are coming. I do not want it to be said I could have prevented the wedding of Redwald and Offa's daughter. Miral smiled, for Osrith was now talking Mercian. The great Mercian king whose home was Tamworth had become overlord of the East Angles by killing a wedding party at Redwald's estate. It was never known whether the daughter survived. The Norse are nothing to do with us, Miral told her. We just wish to prevent the wedding of the Lady Eadgyth to Sigtryggr of Eothwick. Then tell me, Osrith said. What is your plan? 88,888,888. The plan was more outrageous than the one Osrith had presented to her men, and to be honest, she could hardly believe what Miral was telling her. Replace the bride with you, Miral repeated, taking her up a flight of stairs, and onto the ground floor of the castle. Osrith simply stared at him. What? She said at last. That was ludicrous. She was a 50-year-old woman and Eadgyth was a girl. And then she thought of Jarl, who had been entertaining her Mercian warriors with a story about Thor and his hammer. Osrith knew that story. The god had dressed up as a bride to steal back Mja Tilda Pilgrolna from the giants. While you can go up the Isle instead, and when you are shown to be, well, not Eadgyth, she can be on her way safely to Francia. Miral, she said, and reached for the man's arm. I will do this, for you, Osrith told him. But, will you release the slaves? Miral gave her no answer for a moment. Then, he nodded. And for the second time that day she suspected that there was something more to this than the straightforward Miral was telling her. And then in the shadows, just for a moment, the man who must truly be behind it all. Elfberh, Miral's brother, who had pulled in a reluctant Miral. There was no real independence movement, only the rebellion of one man who sought to gain control of as much land as he could. Show me, Osrith told him. Show me the dress. There were lots of layers, silk and brocade and embroidery, with a large veil, as was the custom. It was ludicrous, but it had to work. Osrith had to do something to stop the rebellion. So for her friend, and her poor dear departed Elfrith, she was going to be the best fake bride there could ever be. 88,888,888. I do like a wedding, Finan said to Uhtred, as the nobles of Mercia, Wessex, and the Norse of Eothwick continued to assemble. And the Lord of Bibbenberg has made an appearance, he added, smiling to his lord. And the King of Eothwick, Uhtred added, nodding to his son-in-law. I wonder what he is feeling like now? Finan mused. Nervous, like all bridegrooms, Uhtred replied. He was scanning the people, looking for anything amiss. And he thought he may have found it when a bunch of about a dozen slaves were inched to one side of the church to the other. Finan was staring at them, looking them over one by one. And here comes the bride, Sihtric said, near Uhtred's ear. They watched as Sigtrygg's bride, surrounded by a guard of Mercians, walked slowly up the center of the church. She doesn't look very happy, said Osferth, looking at the dipped head of the woman coming slowly towards the altar. How can you tell? Sihtric asked him. You can't even see her face. They all looked at the slow procession of Sigtrygg's bride, surrounded by 4 West Saxon guards. How Miral had located the uniform, he didn't say, but Osrith reckoned on Elfberg. The whole of the setup seemed very well funded, and she would have loved to have known where that money was coming from. At least her men were with her, whatever was about to happen. "What are you thinking, Lord?" Finan asked tutored. "That, after everything, a grandson of Ivar the Boneless is marrying a granddaughter of Alfred," he told his friend. "You? That I recognize there is rope around the bride's ankles," Finan told him. "And that she has a weapon of some sort on her leg." A nudge to Berg got the young Norse boy to his feet, and Utad backed away through the crowd. As the bride, cloaked and hooded, got to the altar and turned to face Eadgith's intended. And in front of the crowd, from the crowd of slaves, a man was bringing a boy. It was Bjol, and it was Elfberg had him at the shoulder, his hands bound. "He has been brought on the occasion of your wedding, as a gift, from your kin, Skolskala Grimson," Elfberg told Sigrid. The man looked at the boy, and then over to Ethelistan, then back to the boy. "My thanks," he told Elfberg, and then bent his head to Bjol, saying very quietly, "You are safe now, boy." Then he turned to the bishop, who looked between Sigrid and Osrith, and approached them, a gospel on the eagle lectern beside him. He looked nervous, as most priests did when they saw Norse at such close quarters. But then a cry came from the back of the church. Osrith looked, noting Ethelistan at the front near the Merson nobles, and watched as a woman came hurling towards them. It was the Norse woman, possible mother of Bjol. The boy shrunk back close to Osrith, but the woman was too quick, and grabbed the boy by the shoulder, thrusting him towards Sigtryg. Bjol scuttled to Sigtryg's side, and cowered there. "No!" a woman cried, "he is to be your sacrifice." "My husband, dead at the hand of slaves," she added, and glared at the slaves behind Elfberg. "We brought him to you, our king, for fortune for your union, chosen by the gods." "No!" another cry came out, and this time it was Ethelistan. He was on his feet and addressing those assembled, his arm outstretched towards the woman and getting between her and the boy. "No," Ethelistan repeated. "This is a Christian wedding. There will be no sacrifices. I will not have such barbarity." But the woman was quick. She made to run to the boy, and got part of the way when Oshir, standing to the left of Osrith, pushed her off course. She stumbled towards Elfberg, and Osrith could see she had a knife in one hand. She was going to kill the boy, right there and then. Osrith turned, and leapt, bringing down the woman, who was already slashing the air with the blade, and she managed to knock it from her hand. The woman writhed like an angry cat, but Osrith was faster and she slammed the woman's hand against the altar, finally yielding the knife. "Take her away," Osrith demanded of her guard, and Elfkin strode to Osrith, seizing the woman and thrusting her towards the guards, who held her, one arm each. But the disquiet amongst the wedding guests did not subside. In fact, it increased, for someone near the West Saxon area, cried, "This is not Eadgith." A laugh began, which echoed around the church, and Osrith backed away, unhooded as she was, as her warriors stood close beside her. The shout had come from Ethel, a pretense at unity, then, from Ethelistan's half-brother. "It seems it is not," declared Sigtryg with interest, chuckling for a second when Osrith got to her feet and looked at Eofuix king. "What is this, Lord Ethelistan?" he asked. "A part of your Christian wedding tradition?" But Ethelistan said nothing, for the woman who had tried to kill Bjol spoke again, and this time she was looking at Osrith through narrow eyes, a small smile at her lips. "Here is the slave that killed my husband, my king," she told Sigtryg. "Ska tilde pilcro ll, your kin, was cut down when he attempted to leave this boy out for sacrifice to the gods for you." "Slave," Sigtryg repeated. "They are all slaves," she told him, and pointed out all of Osrith's men. Blades were suddenly at their throats. Beside her, Elfberg grinned. From east side of the church, Utad and his men moved to see the commotion. Eswi still under the threat of blade from Osvath. Utad turned to Eswi, and asked, "Was this your plan?" "Constantine's plan?" There was anger in his voice now, and with it, danger. "It was Mercia's plan," Eswi admitted, They call themselves the true Mersons. The true Mersons, Utad repeated. Those who wish independence. But it also helped Alba, did it not? Utad pointed out. Eswi said nothing, because he was looking towards the altar. The bride, who certainly was not he, was being approached by the king of Eofoic, who had his blade pointed at her chest. "Oh no, Osrith, no!" exclaimed Finan, as he watched, horrified. It got worse as he watched as his wife dropped the wedding cloak and stood before Sigtryggr, raising no weapon in response. "You killed my kin, Osrith Lackland," Sigtryggr said, loudly, so that all of the church could hear. Osrith looked back, the familiar tingling at the side of her head returning. She kept her eyes on the man and refused to look away, replying, "Yes, I killed the man who was trying to kill this boy for no other reason than he has a deformity." Sigtryggr looked her up and down, before glancing to Bjorn. "How unfortunate that you became a slave," he told her, and reinforced his grip on his sword. "I am sure you know that any slave who attacks a free man is sentenced to die." Osrith. She heard Finan's voice call across the church, but she did not turn round. She was made to do it, Finan asserted to Utad urgently, as Sigtryggr put his sword to her throat. "Please, Utad, listen to me, believe me." Then, the king of Eofoic lowered his eyes and whispered to her. It came in Norse, the words unmistakable. But Osrith got in there first. He was going to leave this child tied to a tree to starve, Osrith told him, in English, so everyone in the church could hear. "That is not the way, in Mercia, am I not correct, Lord Aethelstan?" Osrith made to turn to the ruler of Mercia. "You are correct, Osrith of Berwick," he told her. But Sigtryggr was unmoved. "He was my kin, you do not interfere with our beliefs." "But the belief in Mercia is Christianity," Osrith plunged on. "You are marrying the sister of Lord Aethelstan, a most Christian woman from a most Christian family, in a Christian service. You claim to be Christian yourself. You have been baptized," she added. "I will kill you," Sigtryggr told her. Osrith laughed. "And yes, I did hear tell how you fought a man in a state of undress. The pagan way, so I believe." "Are you a Christian, woman?" he asked. "You made a good berserker." "She fought naked," Utad repeated, loud enough that he might embarrass Finan. But his friend's reply was his usual stoic position, but this time, his friend was as insightful as he was unruffled. "She must have had her reasons," his friend told him. "Being an iron-chained slave under 2 West Saxon guards. Desperate people do desperate things." But then a gasp brought their attention back to Sigtryggr. "I have a much better idea," he told Osrith. "You can be the sacrifice instead." But Osrith felt herself smiling, as a fuzziness came to her eyes. "That's my wife," replied Finan, proudly. "She fights like the Archangel Michael himself." "My sister will never sprout wings," replied Utad. "He has sinned too much, with too many men." But Finan was not listening now. Utad said nothing, and within a heartbeat, Finan had left his lord's side, pushing aside swords as if they were blades of grass. He was stopped, however, by 3 of Sigtryg's men. "I am sorry, King Sigtryggr," she replied loudly, as she saw Finan not 10 feet away. "I cannot marry you." They looked at one another, and Finan smiled, before making a fresh attempt to push forward. "I have a husband of my own." Sigtryggr raised his sword. But Osrith was not finished yet. She reached to her ankle and found Sainidstjan. No Norseman was going to kill her unopposed. But Sigtryggr was opposed. Someone stepped in front of him as he drew his blade, knocking it away, and then put a hand out to Osrith as her knees gave way, glancing to Kaltigar, who caught her fall. In the aisle, Osrith noticed the Norse family, Eilif's family, had pushed their way up towards her. Perhaps he has seen her company approaching, swords on their way out of scabbards, Osrith thought. His men, Mercia's men. And then, she realized, he had Elfberg under knife point, Miral at the back of the slaves. "She is no slave," she heard Eilif say. "She rescued us from slavers who were working against you, Lord Aethelstan." And Aethelstan bent his head to Eilif, while the man told him the whole story. After a few moments, Aethelstan straightened and looked out to his people, the Wittens of different parts of the country, and to the Norse people of Mercia, Athelistan called to them all, standing in from the front of the altar. "This loyal servant of your land is well. She has traveled afar to my land to serve the country she loves and has put the friendship and loyalty of King Sigtryggr of Eofuik to the test, which he has passed, remembering his Christian vows, and has spared the child which his kinfolk bade him to slaughter." Athelistan turned to Sigtryggr and bowed his head. Then he turned to Miral. "General Miral," he said to his commander, promoting him as he spoke, "please take Osrith of Bernicia to rest, having received what I understand to be a blow to the head in her dedication to my land." Was this it? Osrith thought, as she looked at Miral. From the look on his face it did not seem like. He seemed like a man thwarted. Perhaps Athelistan knew that all along. "I would like no man to say that I do not respect other cultures," he went on. "After the wedding to my sister, there will indeed be a sacrifice." He turned to look at Elfberg, and signaled that he should be held. "This man claims to be acting in the interests of Mercia. He is nothing but a self-serving rebel who has caused misery and discord in my land. So I ask all Mercians, whether they have known this man or never seen him before today, to reaffirm the oath they gave to me on my accession to Mercia, kneel to me and honor your word." And they did so. Osrith and Kaltigar stood back and watched her Mercians kneel, as did the rest of the guard, and the lords. It was a splendid sight, and she thought, and how clever of Athelstan to get them all to do it, to wipe blame from all of them by starting again. If he was cunning enough, which he was, Athelstan would already know the traitorous lords and they would be dispatched at some time in the near future.